Joining me now is Dan Palmer. He's a former advisor to Republican primary presidential candidate Ted Cruz and contributor for The Hill, and Jammu Green, former candidate for a Democratic National Committee chair and a Fox News contributor. And I want to start, guys, with the border wall fence. Jammu, what's your take?
Well, I certainly think that President Trump has been beating this drum very consistently, which consistency isn't something that you see a lot of in politics. But looking back at this past week, Arthel, was this a good week for America? Is this type of leadership style good for America when you've got on the border wall specifically the majority of Americans saying that they are not in support of building a border wall, when you had in the midterm elections a pretty significant rebuke of President Trump's policies around immigration? You would hope that the leader of our country would be able to, sit down and say, let's negotiate a deal, let's compromise. The fact that he's having lunch with all Republicans and no Democrats, does he think that he can negotiate with himself? I think it's really about that quote that Confucius, or a wise man, said, that true wisdom is knowing what you don't know. And I think that applies to leadership as well. And President Trump has not been exhibiting any sort of qualities that he doesn't know, that he knows what he doesn't know.
Dan, let me get you in here, get your take on the state of the 3 government shutdowns, this one partial. On President Trump's watch, funding for the border wall fence being the current reason. Is it worth it for President Trump's legacy, and also keeping in mind that his campaign promise was that Mexico was going to pay for the wall?
I think we have to look at the 2016 election and put it in context. That was the culmination of a growing discontent among a very large number of Americans who are not well served by the leadership of either party in D.C. They weren't prospering with globalism, open borders, and endless foreign wars. These are people whose communities are being overrun by non-assimilating migrants. Their wages are flat, and their blood is being spilled on foreign soil. These are the folks who elected Donald Trump president in 2016. For them, this is not about Donald Trump. This is personal. It's their lives, their families, and their future. I think when the Democrats want to look at this as through a lens of it's Donald Trump, they're just totally missing the point.
Jammu?
I actually think that we look at things, issues, and our media and our politics through the Donald Trump lens way, way, way too much. So I'll give Dan that. But as you look at the chaos and the uncertainty in December, in the Christmas month of all times, this is not leadership. I don't think that the majority of people who voted Trump into office expected this sort of chaos. And I'm not talking about the chaos that only people in the media or people in the Beltway in D.C. are talking about. I'm talking about the chaos that is infiltrating into families and relationships, and this constant just chaos. The New York Times wrote an interesting piece about it, which it's just basically war every day. This piece is out today. I recommend everyone reading it. That is not leadership. We have to get to a place where the president understands that he is not above the law, that he is not all-powerful, that to make things work, legislation, it comes with compromise. And there was a deal on the table earlier in this week. He could have taken it, but instead he watched television for a few hours and then threw the country back into chaos.
Well, we're just getting word that Vice President Pence is meeting with Senator Chuck Schumer right now on Capitol Hill, so we'll see how that meeting goes. Meanwhile, Dan, getting you back into this conversation, I want to move on to and get your analysis on President Trump's decision to withdraw troops from Syria and Afghanistan.
Well, the Democrats, establishment Republicans, the national security lobby, foreign powers, all benefit from the status quo. And, they benefit both materially, financially, when they're not in power, and they benefit through the influence they have in these foreign adventures. I think Trump is taking a different look at this and saying, you know, we really need to reprioritize. And that's an existential threat to the status quo. Now, that's going to come with chaos, as Jermu correctly suggests, but that chaos is not necessarily a bad thing. The current
what sort
regime,
of chaos
the
do you
current
think,
status
though,
quo
when you're
has not
talking
served
about,
people
Dan,
well.
what sort of chaos do you think might ensue if you're talking about pulling out troops from Syria and Afghanistan without the consent of the defense secretary?
The defense secretary works for the President of the United States. We have civilian control over the military. The chaos that's going to ensue is, for example, in Afghanistan, this has been the killing zone for empires for generations, whether it's the British Empire, the Russians. Now, 17 years in, the United States is very difficult topographically. It's adjacent to a nuclear power Pakistan. It's very difficult to eradicate it. And over in Syria, ISIS is obviously been diminished, but they're not going to be exterminated. You know, as long as the causes for ISIS persist, then ISIS fighters will persist. So what is the long-term role of the United States in these
Dan, wrap up for me, because I'm getting the
wars?
wrap cue. I don't want to cut you off, but wrap it up for me.
I think the final word is on this border wall. We have 325 million Americans. We have 160 workers. I'd like to change the debate right here, right now. So Chuck and Nancy, if you're watching, get out your calculators. $1.3 billion is $8 per worker.
We have to
There's
go.
$1.3 billion that he has not spent from last year. He has $1.35 billion that he could have spent last year. One big promise he made was to listen to his generals, and that's a promise that has not been kept.
Wow. All right.
If wages go up 6 cents,
Green,
the
I'm
wall's
sorry,
paid
Dan.
for.
I got to go. They're just telling me hard rap. Jamu Green, Dan Palmer, thanks to both of you. I'm sure this debate will continue. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.